Thanks everyone for joining us. We are gathering here to do a bit of Q&R follow-up from our You Asked For It series, specifically from our sermon on sexual health. And so I've got Pastor Garry and Pastor Tash with me, and we're going to share a few more responses to a few of your questions that we weren't able to get to from that original sermon. So thanks for being here. Thanks for your willingness to share that topic, to give us a great message. And thank you again for an incredible follow-up with some great questions. So let's dive in, you two. There were a number of great questions that were asked. And so the first one is this: do sexual experiences affect purity in the eyes of God?
Mm-hmm. And did you want to?
You take it away.
I'll start, and then you can interact.
Sounds
okay.
Good.
So if I was going to give it a simple, straightforward answer, my answer would be yes, that it has a bearing or an effect on purity in the eyes of God. And my reason for saying that is that God's divine desire for us is that sexual activity, and especially, I would say, intercourse, are designed for the context of marriage. And so when we are acting outside of God's design, then we are moving away from what in essence is the purity of God's design. And I would refer to the writer in Hebrews who says, let the marriage bed be held in honor among all. And so I think that is something that we do need to revere. So God's idea of intercourse, it was his idea, and there are multiple reasons for it to be within the context of marriage. But why don't I pause there and get some interaction?
Yeah, I think the important piece to remember when it comes to talking about purity is that how God sees us isn't necessarily affected by our purity. That God sees us as beloved and desired and wanted. And so when we start talking about purity, it doesn't diminish God's grace in our life. So regardless of a person's experience, God's grace is big enough and covers all. And so when we talk about purity, it's more in the sense of God's design and good plans and hopes and wants for us.
Right, yeah.
And so it's one of those words that's been misused so often and in such a way that has hurt so many people, that it's important to acknowledge and shed light on the fact that God offers redemption and grace and mercy regardless of a person's experience, chosen or not chosen. And so God sees us still as his children that are beloved.
Yeah, I like that. It's a combination, the question with the sentence, like in terms of purity and then how God sees us.
Yeah.
And if it's just coming straight up and saying, look, the purity culture has done a lot of damage. And I'm not going to say has it done more damage than good. It's done a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. The reality is that Jesus demonstrated that he has tremendous love, and even in his interactions with prostitutes.
Yeah.
So in terms of how God sees us, like you say, and his desire is always going to be for us to be in a relationship with him.
Yeah.
There is still this aspect of, do our actions affect our purity, which is another matter. Mm-hmm. And that's also a yes. So I think we have to hold that together, and I'm glad that you brought up how does God see us. So thanks for that one.
Yeah.
No, that's good. No, great stuff. It was incredible, just the number of questions that came through during that sermon, let alone afterwards as well. And so a follow-up question here that I'd love to be able to chat with you about is, then is there a need for alternatives that would pluck people out of that, that dopamine high, just as drugs have alternatives to wean people away from them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Did you want to?
Yeah, I can jump right on that. I think it's a really, really interesting statement. And if I'm understanding what this question is ultimately asking, is leaning towards this medical concept of supporting someone coming off of medical drugs and supporting them in the transition from using to not using. And when it comes to pornography or sexual behavior, as far as I understand, the top recommendation from doctors and psychologists is therapy. And so it's not always about replacing the behavior, it's about digging into the root of why a person is acting out and using pornography or sexual behavior as a band-aid or a dopamine hit in response to a deeper issue. That's the studies that I've read more on recently, that's what's showing up. And so replacing dopamine highs with going for a run and changing behaviors is a good thing to do, but it's just replacing one behavior with another if it's not addressing the core root issue. Because pornography isn't the issue, there's something else going on, and that's why someone is using that as a tool to get dopamine.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I think, again, I feel like, if I'm understanding the question correctly, and I think you were illustrating this when we had that sermon together about potato chips and that sort of instant reward and the challenge around eating only 2 or 3 or whatever. I think only my wife has got that level of discipline to do that. I certainly do not. No. That's a confession. But the dopamine in itself is good. It's part of what God has designed in us. So these are good things. It's just the challenge is that there's this particular cycle. And so it, like you say, exploring why this particular cycle or why a person uses this, pornography or self-pleasure for dopamine hits, and exploring that through conversational therapy will help understand that. But I still feel like dopamine is okay, and it's meant for good. Like there's what I would call God has meant for us to have pleasure, to be pleased. And so the other day we were talking about how serving somebody, ministering to somebody else, can produce like a dopamine reward. I feel great after that. And so I think those are other things that we can also be looking at to say, hey, dopamine on its own isn't the issue. It's the type of cycle that we're engaged in. And so giving and receiving affection, giving and receiving care is another way of experiencing that. And I think that's part of what God has meant for us.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, that's good. So then, a little bit further, this is great because these questions, again, just really roll well into each other. Can you mention perhaps some specific steps to help someone who is addicted to self-pleasure and pornography? And then there's a couple other follow-up ones here. I'll just say them and then we'll continue with each of these individually. But can you mention consequences, perhaps, of pornography to steer off those of younger ages who are perhaps beginning to encounter it? And so I'll start with, again, that first one there. Can you mention specific steps to help someone who finds themselves addicted to self-pleasure and pornography?
Yeah, good. Well, I'll start on this one. You can pick it up.
Take it away,
again, trying to be as direct and as clear and concise as possible. It might sound simple, but prayer is vital. It is the Lord's will for us to have healthy relationships. It is the Lord's will for us to be in personal relationships. We need to be praying and asking the Lord's will to be done in our lives and to direct us in the way of our choices and our desires. And so that's one. Accountability partners is another one. I feel like it's really important. Accountability partners can be professional counseling, for example. So Tyler last Sunday talked about health, mental health, and part of that is to, once we destigmatize this, we can also destigmatize counseling. And I obviously would gravitate towards Christian counseling, but having an accountability partner, but having professional counseling, somebody outside our system who we can talk to in a safe space. And then also somebody else, at least one other person that you feel safe, that you can talk to say, listen, I'm struggling with XYZ. I'm struggling with hitting those, going to this site, or I'm struggling with clicking on, TikTok or whatever, and talk it through with somebody that you trust that can actually then give you good advice and not just say everything will be okay. Another step is delete the apps. Delete the apps, delete your accounts. If TikTok or Facebook videos or that site is not helping you and it's just a lure there, you may need to delete it. You may need to delete your account. Predetermine what level or rating of movie you're going to watch, or predetermine if there's X type of scene that you're not going to continue, and just give yourself those preemptive opportunities. And then the other step I would say is be intentional to change your routines. I've worked with people addicted to various types of drugs over the years, and thanks to Dr. Mark Lewis in this Biology of Desire, I've been able to come alongside people that are addicted to crack, etc. And one of the things we do is we change patterns. And so for somebody addicted to pornography or self-pleasuring, changing your patterns and being intentional about that, and the conditions with which you're going to partake. So those are a couple of steps that I would offer.
Yeah, and I'd agree with those. I think you can sum those up in kind of three main categories: that we need community, we need to be honest with others and with ourselves, and we need to start owning our choices, because I observe a lot is, hey, if I tell you that I'm struggling with this, you're going to fix it for me.
That's good.
And it's a really important piece that it takes ownership of, this is the choice I have made, and I am now making a choice to change this behavior. And the beautiful thing about prayer and all of this is that as we start practicing in hard moments of temptation or mistakes, if we turn to prayer, we start to learn this important lesson that God is with us in it.
Amen.
That there's just no shame in those moments. That God knows already, so why do we try to hide what God already knows? And if we start practicing with people, like I said on June 8th, talk to people, talk to God, and that's going to enable us and you, whoever you might be, to start to have some self-awareness and acknowledgement and make the choices you need to make. Because only you can do it by God's grace and power.
Yeah, I like that. And it strikes me when you say own it. That really bears repeating, because too often I hear people in various forms of addiction or bad habits projecting their circumstance onto somebody else. And that isn't a solution. And it's not the reality. And we need to start by saying, it's me. And if we understand that God loves us, even though we're feeling this way, or we have these thoughts or these actions, then maybe that'll help us to stop projecting and start owning it.
No, that's good. So let me ask this as a follow-up from this individual. Can you mention some consequences of pornography that can help perhaps steer people off? I've often heard the best place, the easiest way to stop is to never start. But
That's great.
But what are some of those consequences then? Because these are important things, I think, that some of us don't always realize are end results of this path if we are to come down that way.
I think the first one is that a consequence isn't meant to motivate us by fear. And so when we talk about these are the dangers surrounding pornography and the addiction of self-pleasure, is this is just not what we were intended for. And so, like pornography, bare minimum, the majority of people that are involved in the industry, I won't give numbers, are not there by choice, or are there by a choice that has not been actually given to them. Life circumstances forced decisions that are not healthy. And so supporting an industry that engages in this kind of behavior that also traffics in people. It's an important awareness to have that if you engage with this substance, you are supporting an industry that abuses people. And I think that is not a shame statement, it's an awareness statement. Then if we move into the self-pleasuring area, the reality is that you are engaging with yourself to get a dopamine hit, and your brain is learning that only your pleasure matters. And so if you are in a relationship or enter into marriage, your sexual behavior has learned to self-gratify instead of mutual gratification. And so it's an important piece to recognize as we also talk about self-pleasure, the realities of where this happens in life. It affects future spouses or future partners. It affects you as a person because your brain can start to tell you only my pleasure matters. And that's not a healthy behavior.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it is good. Yeah, I think you've got sort of the indirect consequences and then the direct ones. And so we talk about human trafficking. That's, I would say indirect, because for the person that is subscribing to or engaging with pornography, they don't have a direct sense that they're supporting or involved with human trafficking. But that is actually the case. And that needs to be rooted out, and the way to do that is to just eliminate the clients and ruin that business model. Another one, like you were saying, about a distorted perspective on intimacy, affection, and even intercourse. By looking at pornography, it's a false positive, and it's based on this promotion culture that we're in, where it's all these sort of false ideals. And so that affects a person who then says, well, I can't either live up to that, or I can't find that, or that's what it means. But that's a distorted perspective on reality. Intimacy and affection and intercourse are based on relationships. And that happens person to person. And so you land up with this distorted effect. And it affects then your ability to be intimate with somebody else, to show affection to somebody else. And if you go to, get married, it affects your intercourse relationship because of this distorted perspective that has developed. The other one that I would say is that it is a form of adultery. Because if you're in a marriage relationship and you're engaging in porn, you are alienating your spouse. And now you're creating this separation with your spouse, which then harms that relationship. It struck me as I was thinking about this, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, essentially in the Sermon on the Mount, he brings like in the Old Testament it was all about external life, and now Jesus is, in the Sermon on the Mount, is bringing our internal life into the view. And he's like, if you hate somebody, it's like committing murder. And if you look on another, now the language is this: if you look on another woman to lust after her, you have committed adultery. Now, so in the day and age, he was speaking to men, but in the day and age that we're living in, it applies to men and women. If you look at another person and lust after them, you're committing adultery. So just unpacking that for 1 minute, I don't think that he's talking or assuming that everybody's married. I think the case, whether you're married or single, if you look at another person and lust after them, you're committing adultery. And what that means, a lot of times when Jesus talks about adultery, he's actually meaning that you're trading your relationship with God for a relationship with something else and placing that as a higher priority. And so whether you're single or you're married, if you're single, which is probably more highlighted in the New Testament than being married, the singlehood is in a New Testament perspective, is the higher calling.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. And so Jesus is really challenging us in our internal lives. And so if I was parsing this more specifically to say, looking at someone to lust after them, I think we have to at least say that, look, I look at other people and I appreciate someone if they, just fully forthcoming here. I see somebody and I think, oh, they're good looking, or oh, that's a beautiful person, etc. The difference is if I look and I think that, or am I lusting after them? And that's a line you have to be able to manage on your own, but that's the line. And I think the problem is that we get a little confused by that. We say, well, of course I can appreciate, Tyler's a good-looking guy. He's tall, he's got clean-cut hair, etc. So people are going to look at him and say, he's a good-looking guy. End of story. That's fine. It's beautiful. The difference now is, though, if we take it to that next level. And so if that is the case, then we say, Lord, help me avert my eyes, or whatever. Or sometimes you may need to say, like, Satan, get lost. Leave me alone.
That's right.
Say it.
Anyway, that's good.
Get all excited.
The cool thing I'll
Yeah.
say, these brain patterns and these brain behaviors, as you will say, science is so cool and reveals to us what God has gifted us with in creation.
Yeah.
Our brain can change its patterns and its behaviors.
It's true.
So there's just like an immense amount of hope.
Right.
Yes.
Like it's not the end.
That's right.
It's not serving you,
Yeah.
but God has good
Yeah.
things to serve you.
Yeah. And Mark Lewis, Dr. Lewis, that I referred to earlier, would call that neuroplasticity. And so that is what he's saying, whether it comes to whatever form of addiction it is, we can create new pathways.
Yep.
Their new roads can be built,
Yep.
and old ones can be taken down.
Yep.
Praise the Lord.
No, that's good. Let me circle back to a bit of the conversation you two were having about singlehood, because that really helps inform this next question. And that is, how do we encourage single parents who are separated or divorced since they still have sexual needs? What would you say to that individual?
Yeah. Well,
I feel like you kick this one off.
Okay. So I'm gonna just, this is amazing disclosure here, but so my mother back years ago was in social work, and one of her main programs was unwed mothers, and in many cases they were quite young, and like kids with kids. One of the things that she was quite adamant about is that the church needs to be a place, and you talked about caring or healing communities.
Right.
This is like decades ago. She was on that case saying we need to be a place where unwed mothers can come with their children and not have any side eyes. Okay? Because she experienced a lot of that. She would come with women that were single with children, and there'd be all kinds of glances. And it's like you can't have it both ways. So we need to be this place where people are welcomed, and especially I think we've unintentionally, and you and I have talked about this, Tosh, unintentionally elevated marriage over singlehood. And what we need to really do is recognize and appreciate those people that are living singlehood lives or single parents, and so on. And I think those are a couple of things that I want to say. I also would say talk to people who are living celibate lives, who are by choice, who are saying, I'm not married, so I'm not going to have intercourse. I've talked to, and I mentioned this, I've talked to a senior gentleman, or not a senior, but an older gentleman who is living that way by choice, and I've talked to a young adult woman who was doing that, because I wanted to learn more. Talk to some of these people, build friendships. That's also necessary, and be someone that you can be a friend. Like, you can be a friend to somebody. A friend is more than an acquaintance. A friend is where you can actually have a form of intimacy, where you can have affection. We share our feelings with each other. That's intimacy. I can hug you. I can, that's affection. There are different languages. And remarriage is another possibility as well. So, maybe I'll pause there. Like, we're really just going after it, right?
Yeah, and this is such an immensely complex question that's asked too, because I think of the people in my life who have gone through divorce, and to start to re-navigate what your sexuality looks like as a single person, I can't relate.
Right.
And
literally.
Quite literally.
Right.
And I'm okay with not being able to relate, but I think that's that really important piece of recognizing that our sexual selves are part of the whole self that God has created. And so navigating that as a single person, I can't speak to, we can't, neither of us are sitting here.
Right.
Yeah, and that deeply affects what we answer with, because we get to a more logical, educated response than someone else might sitting here. And hence Gary's point about finding someone who has gone through that before you, or has made choices to live that life, has accepted that call on their life, is the best I can say at this point, and in my knowledge and my understanding, is to find those people. But I'm the one sitting here reiterating the message of there's no shame in this journey of finding someone and talking with them, and not being afraid of what your life has been or what it is, and engaging honestly and vulnerably with a person that's been there before. Because we just sit here in this context, the three of us both, with that's not our experience, and that changes how we read and learn and listen to other people, because we don't have context.
Yeah, and I mean, the challenge for, let's say, the three of us, and the challenge for people that are asking this question who are on the other side is, am I willing to open up my life to another person or other people, and develop friendships with them and develop intimacy with them? Because it's one thing to say that's what someone else has to do, but am I willing to be part of that?
Right.
And that's the challenge. And so Wesley Hill has written a couple of books. One is Spiritual Friendship, and he talks a lot about that. And so I think that's our challenge as well.
That's good.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts? Those were our questions. And again, thank you for submitting them, and we appreciate the patience in being able to get back to these and engage with them. But it's so important that we have this opportunity and use this medium to be able to do that. So any final thoughts from either of you as we wrap it up?
Final thoughts would take another hour or two.
Yeah.
Fair enough. There's a lot within this. Yes, totally.
I just want to mention some books.
Okay.
Because
Great.
if you want to engage through reading or conversation, I have obviously a few books to recommend, and you can come and talk to me. And let me just say, I'm going to tell you the titles of these books, but there's a bit of a spectrum here, and so you need to come and talk to me to learn more about them. So The New Asceticism, Sarah Coakley, the subtitle is Sexuality, Gender, and the Quest for God. She is really a highly intelligent woman who writes really well, and like slow reading for me, but really great. The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease. This is more, it's a secular book, if you will. Dr. Mark Lewis. Dr. Kevin Lehman, Sheet Music, Uncovering the Secrets of Sexual Intimacy in Marriage. You need to talk to Tyler or me before you get this book, because there's some parameters that we want to give, especially if you are not married.
Good resource. It's a good book. Yep.
Wesley Hill has written one book called Washed and Waiting, Reflections on Christian Faithfulness and Homosexuality. John White, on the book title is called Eros Defiled, The Christian and Sexual Sin. This is really helpful, especially if you want to really have a conversation about self-pleasuring. So again, you got to talk to me first, because some of these books get into things, and the language is the language, right?
Yeah.
Because it's necessary. Chasing Love is another one. Sex and Love in the Home: A Theology of the Household. Again, excellent book. Another perspective, like how are you having this conversation in your home, in your household? Just a couple more. Strange New World: New Thinkers and Activists Redefined Identity and Sparked the Sexual Revolution. Okay. Spiritual Friendship, big. I really recommend. This is Wesley Hill again, but Spiritual Friendship. I think we need to know more about that. And then Hollinger's The Meaning of Sex, Christian Ethics and the Moral Life, if you are theologically inclined. So there's more. I have others, but that gives you a pretty broad sweep of it.
No. Thank you. I just want to say again, thanks to you for submitting the questions.
Yeah.
Thanks to Gary and Tosh for just your in-depth, just sharing your heart and your love for this topic, and that we're willing to wade into these waters and wrestle through this. I think is a gift to me, just hearing you more, but I think all of us as well. Just it's a gift to be able to have these conversations and to dialogue through it. So thanks again.